Hi, and welcome to our last lecture of our Ancient Egypt series. So, let's discuss the most popular pharaoh, King Tut. This was another place that I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to visit. It's in the Valley of the Kings. As you can see, it's one of the many mounds in which so many pharaohs were buried here during the New Kingdom. So it was found by Howard Carter in 1922, and it was pretty much undisturbed. There had been a little bit of tomb raiding. Things had been disheveled. There was some other evidence. But for the most part, especially all the large items, they were still intact. So hence why this is so popular. It's one of the few intact, or the only intact royal tomb that we've been able to find. So let's discuss him for a minute. So he was the son of Akhenaten, our previous family from the Amarna style. Remember how he created a monotheistic religion centered around the sun disk. And this was essentially a power move. Before that, the priests had become too popular. So he created this new religion, which made them obsolete. He moved the capital. And Tutankhamun, originally called, becomes the king at age 8 or 9. Most of the people are not happy with this change from a polytheistic religion to monotheistic, and so things pretty much go back to normal under the control of others as he's this small child. The capital of Amarna is pretty much abandoned, and we're back to this polytheistic religion. Now, he died at age 19, so he essentially didn't rule long. There wasn't much that he was able to accomplish, etc., in such a short reign. He was also, the newest evidence shows that he was also pretty sickly. He had some issues. He had likely an injury from a chariot drive the day before his death. But the strongest evidence is that he actually died of malaria. He had other physical deformities that were indicative of incest. Again, all of these royals are intermarrying. In fact, so he was the son of Akhenaten. He was the stepson of Nefertiti. In like these two and like others, he ended up marrying his half-sister. So this was common. You're keeping the bloodlines pure. You're also trying to discourage any other families, of course, vying for the throne. But anyway, so here we have King Tut. And we're going to study sarcophagus, burial mask, throne. So here we are in the interior. You can see it's covered, and this is black and white, so that it was actually very colorful. And it's covered in hieroglyphics, etc. Now, he died much sooner than expected, so this tomb wasn't intended for him. It was likely intended for someone in the upper echelon of the government, and not for him. They found the items very cramped together, etc. That wouldn't have been the case had it been intended for a pharaoh. It would have been a much larger set of rooms and spaces. Here's a picture of the tied-up tomb, or doors to the tomb. And it's multi-rooms. Here's some guardians outside. So let's explore some of the original pictures. Again, the haphazard placement leads most archaeologists to believe it had been a little bit raided. Guardians. And here we go, the main room, where some of the most popular or famous imagery exists, where you have the sarcophagus, multiple. So this is the outside outer one, King Tutankhamun's gold burial shrine, and within this would have been his 3 nested coffins. So it would have been coffin within coffin with coffin. So think of these nesting dolls in Russia, where you keep taking it apart and getting smaller and smaller. That's the case here. So let's just appreciate the gold here. We're going to see gold throughout these coffins, and gold is associated with divinity. This is across the globe for many religions, not only because of its beautiful color and the shine, it gleams, etc., but also because it doesn't rust. It doesn't, think of how silver oxidizes, but gold doesn't really change so much over time. So this beautiful permanence coincides with the idea of the afterlife and eternity and the eternity of gods or a god. So we see this throughout history associated with religion and divinity. And so here we have a picture of the three nesting coffin, or multiple nesting coffins within. And we're going to study the innermost one for just a brief moment. This is, extraordinarily detailed. You can see the gold, the semi-precious stones, the amount of just craftsmanship that went into creating this is extraordinary. It should be so appreciative. And we should recognize many of these motifs, the iconography of our pharaohs. We have our uraeus cobra, we have our Nini's headdress, the false beard, and our crook and flail. And of course, so much other examples of imagery and iconography associated with the pharaohs and making their way to the afterlife. Here's a close-up. Face is idealized. And so here's what was inside. This is where we find our death mask, which was placed on top of Tutankhamun's mummy. Likely the most famous image associated with King Tut. Note that outside of Egypt, where there's any exhibition where they bring over King Tut's or some of his artifacts, they always advertise with the mask, but just note that the mask does not leave Egypt. Sometimes some museums may have a copy, but just know that if there's ever an exhibition near you, it is not going to actually have this mask because it's so precious to Egypt. They aren't willing to risk the loss. But here we have our clear indication of a pharaoh. Notice that he also had his ears pierced. These larger earlobes were associated with royalty and priests, etc. And look at all these inlaid stones. It's just beautiful, priceless. He's idealized. We can see how there's similarities even going back to the old kingdom of Menkaure and Khafre, etc. So he is idealized and adhering to these proportions and just the style of the pharaohs. Here is the back of the burial mask, and here we have prayers or incantations to help Tutankhamun to go into the afterlife. I forgot to mention on the first page, when he was born Tutankhamun, he changed his name to Tutankhamun, again, because things went back to the old way of this polytheistic religion. And I want to look at King Tut's throne briefly. So many of these elements are familiar. Our eyes are likely drawn to the two lions, in which we've seen all the way through Prehistoric, indicating his power. And so this is the interior is of wood. It was carved out of wood, put together, and then covered in gold, silver, semi-precious stones, colored glass. So here we have a cartouche of his name when he was on the throne. And I want to look at this image. So here is his wife and him, where she is serving him something, some argue giving him this type of perfume. But we can see this intimacy between them. And as well the fact that he respected her, that he included her on this image on his throne of his kingship to bring into the afterlife. And many elements are extremely familiar to us. He's seated on a throne. His feet are elevated on this pedestal. You'll notice on his throne, just like back with our enthroned Khafre, he has the unified Egyptian symbol, or unified Egypt symbols. Some other elements that are familiar is that some of this is still using the Amarna style. The head shape is not as elongated or clearly not as similar to the Amarna style, but look at a little bit of the protruding belly. And of course, the symbolism of the Aten is here. So despite changing back to a polytheistic religion, he still seems to be pulling from his roots of this respect for his father. Because we have the same sun disk, we have the same rays coming down with the Ankhs on the end. And compositionally, this scene is extremely similar to the scene we've looked at with his father and stepmother and stepsisters. Now, let's talk about the last judgment of Hu-Nefer. So we shall end our lecture with a journey to the afterlife. So this is part of a long scroll from the Book of the Dead for Hu-Nefer. He is a scribe. And this is one of our examples of a new vocabulary art history term of a continuous narrative. So what do I mean by that? This is where we're seeing the beginning of the story through the end of the story. And so I've divided this up into the different areas, which divides our story up. And so what we have at the very top is Hu-Nefer. So he was a scribe, and we're going to see him in white. So here's how we recognize the different scenes, is because of this continuous narrative of Hu-Nefer. And at the very top register, he's kneeling down, which we know is in front of the gods, and he has his hands up. And we see all this text of labels, as well as his speech, basically, where he's trying to persuade these gods to allow him to start the process of entering the afterlife. He's discussing his good life, his good deeds, that he is worthy of entering it. The first and foremost is Ra, the sun god. We see that orange disc on top. He's also holding what's called the Ankh. We already referenced this before. We've seen this, and it's this symbol of eternal life. So he wants this eternal life. He wants to continue into the afterlife. He's trying to persuade all these other gods as well. Then we come to the next scene. Okay, so he's made it past those gods. They've allowed him to continue on. And he's led by Anubis. So Anubis is this jackal-headed god. He's the guide to the underworld, the god of funerary rites, the protector of graves, the creator of mummification. So thus he's greatly associated with the dead. Notice how he's holding his hand. This is an intimate gesture where he's leading him through this process. And he's also holding the symbol of the Ankh, this hope of Hu-Nefer achieving that eternal life. And what they come up to is this set of scales, in which Anubis helps to set it up. And so with the afterlife, is the biggest test is where the heart of the deceased, which is in ancient Egypt, this is the belief where they believed that the soul resides in the heart. So you're testing your soul against this feather. Now this feather is of the goddess Ma'at. It's a personification of her. She's the goddess of truth, justice, of this cosmic balance, etc. That eat the heart shouldn't be there, sorry. Which she's also displayed on top of the scale, so reinforcing this idea of judgment, of balance. And so you want your heart to either weigh perfectly equal or less than the feather. And that proves that you've lived a good life. You deserve to go into the afterlife. Now, if your heart were to weigh more than the feather, then you have this really strange creature, monstrous beast called the Devourer. It's part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. All of these animals would have been in ancient Egypt. They were pretty much hunted out. But at the time, of course, they're predatory. Hippopotamuses have killed more people than lions because they're very territorial. Crocodiles, of course, extremely predatory, and they used to live along the Nile. And then lions, we've seen that throughout history. And so they would eat the heart or the soul if it weighed more, and then you'd cease to exist pretty much. Now, while all this is going on, Thoth, our ibis-headed scribe of the gods, is writing this all down. He's recording the results. He's also associated with the god, he's the god of the moon, of knowledge, of wisdom, of writing, hieroglyphics, magic, art, judgment. And he's the patron deity of scribes, in which Hu-Nefer is a scribe. So that's just a cool connection. And so here we come to the final scene. So right before it, Horus, we've seen him before, all the way back to King Narmer, the son of Osiris. He's introducing him to his father, Osiris. Now notice how Horus is also holding that Ankh. You'll notice throughout this scroll we've had hieroglyphics, and those are spells, prayers, incantations to help Hu-Nefer enter the afterlife. And notice how Osiris and these other figures are within this enclosure, this extremely decorative enclosure. And he's on his throne, his feet are elevated, so he's clearly extremely important. And he is the god of the underworld. Let's just go from left to right. So within this enclosure, we see these little figures on top of this lotus leaf, lotus flower, papyrus. And these are the 4 children of Osiris. They're also associated with the 4 cardinal points. And at this point, when a body is mummified, their internal organs are placed in these canopic jars to protect them. And on top of each of these jars is one of the 4 children. So their purpose is to also preserve these canopic jars to help the body of the deceased continue on. Above them is Horus, and we have the Eye of Horus, which is associated with the gods, with eternity, etc. And so he's also holding this ostrich feather again. So this reminder of the fact that Hu-Nefer's heart and his soul did weigh a little bit less than the feather. So he deserves to move on. And then we have the god Osiris. So he is the judge and the lord of the underworld. He is always green because he had been killed at one point. And then his wife Isis, also his sister, and Nephthys, his other sister, and Anubis put him back together again. So this is the first example of mummification. So he had been dead, but through their efforts, especially Isis, they were able to resurrect him for eternal life. He's holding crook and flail again. He also is in white, so is his main wife, the goddess Isis, and she's associated with the birth experience, with rebirth. Consider how she put back together his dismembered body post-death, and this enabled him to come back to life because she collected those. So this rebirth, she becomes associated with birth. Her sister Nephthys, right behind her, is associated with death. She's also a protector of mummies. So these two helped restore him. So they're always going to be important to him. I should mention also the pedestal on which he is seated upon is natron salt. And this is from the Nile, and it is the salt used to preserve mummies and the body in parts in canopic jars. So luckily, Hu-Nefer made it to the afterlife. And he is able to live for eternity with his family in a peaceful way, in which he's still living and doing the work that he did during life, just in a more peaceful manner without sadness. And so here we end our journey through ancient Egypt.